Welcome to another episode of Mike Reads. Tonight we'll be continuing in our series on Thomas Sowell's Economic Facts and Fallacies with our third and final read in Chapter 5, which is entitled Income Facts and Fallacies. Tonight we'll be reading the section entitled Summary and Conclusions. As I've mentioned throughout the course of this series, we are doing this series as a parallel read with Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. So I'll put a link to that series in this video's description so you can check that out as well. As I've also mentioned throughout the course of this series, I'll be doing an analysis and review at the end of each read, so I'll put a timestamp in this video's description so you can jump straight to the analysis and review if that's how you'd like to go about things. So without further ado, let's dive into tonight's fairly short read, which is in Chapter 5, Income Facts and Fallacies, Summary and Conclusions. Some very plain and straightforward facts about income and wealth have been obscured by fallacies based on vague and inconsistent words, garnished with misleading statistics. There is, after all, nothing very mysterious about the fact that inexperienced young people beginning their working careers are unlikely to be paid as much as older, more experienced, and more skilled people with proven track records. Nor is there anything very hard to understand about the fact that households in which fewer people are working at all are unlikely to receive as much money as households in which people who work full-time and year-round are the norm. Nor should it be surprising that some people are paid millions of dollars when their decisions can affect a corporation's profit and loss statement by billions of dollars. A hasty leap from statistical categories to economic realities underlies many fallacies about income and wealth. When more than two-thirds of the economic resources available to people in the bottom 20% of the income earners get left out of income statistics because they are transfers in cash or in kind from government, that is a serious discrepancy between statistics and reality. Similarly, when 3/4 of the economic resources are available to the elderly do not get counted in statistical earnings. Nor are these random discrepancies. Almost invariably, such widely publicized statistics overstate poverty and understate standards of living. When income statistics leave out both taxes on people in upper income brackets and transfers to people in lower income brackets, they exaggerate inequalities as of a given time. When they fail to follow given individuals over time, they exaggerate lifetime inequality as well as enabling other observers to speak of people who are transiently in various income brackets as if they are an enduring quote-unquote class. To say that some people have less probability of achieving a given income or occupational level is too often automatically equated with saying that society puts barriers in their path. This precludes a priori the very possibility that there might be internal reasons for not doing as well economically as some other people. Moreover, this is not just a matter of an abstract judgment. To the extent that there may in fact be internal reasons for not achieving as much as others, directing attention away from those reasons has the practical effect of reducing the likelihood that those reasons will be addressed and the potential for advancement improved. In short, those who are lagging are often a better public image instead of better prospects. Claims by some that they cannot understand or justify large income differences, disparities, inequities, are another version of the presumption that third parties are the best judges, as if people's incomes, like their housing arrangements, should be judged by what a tableau they present to outsiders, rather than how they reflect the choices and mutual accommodations of those directly involved. Such third-party presumptions are often based on an awareness of being part of a more educated group having, on average, more general knowledge than most other people, and an unawareness that the total knowledge of all the others vastly exceeds theirs, as well as being more specific knowledge relevant to the decisions at hand. No third parties can possibly know the values, preferences, priorities, potentialities, circumstances, and constraints of millions of individuals better than those individuals know themselves. Sometimes the presumptions are moral rather than intellectual. Third parties who take on the task of deciding who really deserves how much income often confuse merit with productivity, quite aside from the question whether they have the competence to judge either. In no society of human beings has everyone had the same probabilities of achieving the same level of productivity. People born into families with every advantage of wealth, education, and social position may be able to achieve a high level of productivity without any great struggle that would indicate individual merit. Conversely, people who have had to struggle to overcome many disadvantages in order to achieve even a modest level of productivity may show great individual merit. But an economy is not a moral seminar authorized to hand out badges of merit to deserving people. An economy is a mechanism for generating the material wealth on which the standard of living of millions of people depends. Pay is not a retrospective reward for merit, but a prospective incentive for contributing to production. Given the enormous range of things produced and the complex processes by which they are produced, it is virtually inconceivable that any given individual could be capable of assessing the relative value of the contributions of different people in different industries or sectors of the economy. Few even claim to be able to do that. Instead, they express their bafflement and repugnance at the wide range of income or wealth disparities they see, and, implicitly or explicitly, their incredulity that individuals could differ so widely in what they deserve. This approach has a long pedigree. George Bernard Shaw, for example, said, quote, "A division in which one woman gets a shilling and another 3,000 shillings for an hour of work has no moral sense in it. It is just something that happens, and that ought to not happen. A child with an interesting face and pretty ways, and some talent for acting, may, by working for their films, earn 100 times as much as its mother can earn by drudging in an ordinary trade." End quote. Here are encapsulated the crucial elements in most critiques of quote-unquote income distribution till this day. First, there is the implicit assumption that wealth is collective and hence must be divided up in order to be dispensed, followed by the assumption that this division currently has no principle involved, but just happens. And finally, the implicit assumption that the effort put forth by the recipient of income is a valid yardstick for gauging the value of what was produced and the appropriateness of the reward. In reality, income is not distributed, so the fashionable metaphor of quote-unquote income distribution is misleading. Most income is earned by the production of goods and services, and how much that production is really worth is a question that need not be left for third parties to determine, since those who directly receive the benefits of that production know better than anyone else how much that production is worth to them, and have the most incentives to seek alternative ways of getting that production as inexpensively as possible. In short, a collective decision for society as a whole is as unnecessary as it is impossible, not to mention presumptuous. It is not a question of rewarding input efforts or merits, but of securing output at values determined by those who use that output, rather than by third-party onlookers. If the pleasure gained by watching a child movie star is valued much more highly by millions of moviegoers than the benefits received by a much smaller number of people who benefit from buying the product of the drudgery of that child's mother, by what right is George Bernard Shaw or anyone else authorized to veto all these people's choices of what to do with their own money? Although one person's income may be 100 or 1,000 times greater than another's, it is of course very doubtful that one person is 100 or 1,000 times more intelligent or works 100 or 1,000 times as hard. But again, input is not the measure of value. Results are. At a multi-billion-dollar corporation, one person's business decisions can easily make a difference of millions or even billions of dollars compared to someone else's decisions. Those who see paying such a person $50 million or $100 million a year as coming at the expense of consumers or stockholders have implicitly accepted the zero-sum view of economics. If the value of the services rendered exceeds the pay, then both consumers and stockholders are better off, not worse off. whether the person hired is a corporate CEO or a production line employee. Would anyone say that the pay of an airline pilot comes at the expense of passengers or of the airline stockholders when both are better off as a result of the services rendered? Would anyone even imagine that one pilot is as good as another when it comes to flying a commercial jet airliner with hundreds of people on board, so that getting some crop duster pilot at lower pay to fly the jet would make the stockholders and passengers better off? Yet that is the kind of reasoning, or lack of reasoning, that is often applied when discussing the pay of corporate CEOs, and virtually no one else in any other field, including professional athletes or entertainers who earn similar or higher incomes. Perhaps the most fallacious assumption of all is that third parties with neither experience nor expertise can make better decisions on the basis of their emotional reactions than the decisions of those who have both experience and expertise, as well as a stake in the results. Despite the popularity of the phrase, quote-unquote, income distribution, most income is earned, not distributed. Even millionaires seldom simply inherited their fortunes. Only a fraction of the income in American society is actually distributed in such forms as Social Security checks or payments to welfare recipients, for example. Most income is quote-unquote distributed only in the figurative statistical sense that the incomes of different people are in varying amounts that can be displayed in a curve on a graph, as in the previous discussion of middle-class incomes. But much of the rhetoric surrounding variations in income proceeds as if society is collectively deciding how much to hand out to different individuals. From there, it is a small step to arguing that since society distributes income with given results today that many do not understand or like, there should be a simple change to distributing income in a different pattern that would be more desirable. In reality, this would by no means be either a simple or innocuous change. On the contrary, it would mean going from an economic system in which most people are paid by those particular individuals who benefit from their goods or services, at rates of compensation determined by supply and demand involving those consumers, employers, and others who assess the benefits received by themselves, to an economy in which incomes are in fact distributed by society, represented by surrogate third-party decision-makers who determine what everyone, quote-unquote, deserves. Those who think that such a profound change would produce better economic or social results can make the case for such a change. But making such a case explicitly is very different from gliding into a fundamentally different world through verbal sleight of hand about quote-unquote income distribution. Okay, that concludes today's read. Now on to the analysis and review part of the video. All right, welcome to the analysis and review part of the video. So the summary here is just kind of a rehash of what he's gone over, but Sowell actually does kind of introduce some new concepts that are general concepts that we can derive from the specifics that he's gone over throughout the course of this chapter. So I'm not going to hammer home every single thing that he mentions in the summary and conclusions. We've already gone over a bunch of this throughout the course of the read in this chapter. What he does mention is that in the general, economics is nothing more than a tool. This is actually going to naturally segue into a similar topic that we covered in our parallel read with Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. The last read we just did was in chapter 15. I'll put a link to that read in this video's description. But economics is a tool. Tools are neither moral nor immoral. They are neither good nor bad. They are at most a moral neutral in the same way that a hammer is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It can be used to hammer in a nail and build somebody a home, or it can be used to hammer in somebody's skull and to effectively build themselves a grave. So economics is not necessarily morally good or morally bad. The way it's implemented might have some moral implication, but the notion of the study of, in this case, scarcity and how people behave in response to scarcity, that notion is neither morally good or bad. In the same way that prices, which Sowell touches touches on in this read, prices are neither moral nor immoral. They are neither a moral good nor a moral bad. They are just indicators. They're markers for how you should respond, how businesses should respond to market influences, the price itself being a form of that influence. It just tells us where on the supply or demand curve a good or service sits in relation to its price. And as mentioned, the cost of goods sold, or the cost it takes to produce a good or service, tells us nothing about its price. This is something we went over in Henry Hazlitt's read in chapter 15. Go ahead and do check that out. But I'm going to basically rehash it. Prices are determined by supply and demand, not the cost or the value that's put into providing the good or service or bringing the good or service to market. Profit is nothing more than, again, a tool and indicator derived from prices primarily that allow producers to focus their energies on those goods or services which provide the greatest benefit not only to them, but obviously to the consumers as well. We know this as an extension of Smith's lesson, that in any mutually consensual exchange, everyone benefits. You go from here and here to here to here and here. Now, if there's something that allows one person to go all the way up to here, then having this person gain as well, the sum of the total parts actually gains even by an even larger margin. But what's missed too is that the consumer is obviously gaining as well, because they wouldn't pay that price in a mutually consensual transaction unless they really badly wanted that good or service, unless they were willing to pay that much higher price than normal. And I used the example in our conversation in Henry Hazlitt's chapter, Economics in One Lesson, in chapter 15 of personal protective equipment. There was a sudden spike in 2020 for PPE, and the corresponding response was that consumers were, and that the price was an indicator that consumers were willing to spend more money. They would rather have the PPE than the money. What that allowed producers to do is recognize an opportunity for increased profitability in that sector. So in that case, the cost of goods sold stayed the same, but because the entire demand curve shifted up, the price that those goods or services could fetch at market went up significantly, which is why the shortage in supply in early 2020 as it relates to PPE was very quickly and very effectively and very efficiently met by responding to changes in prices, by allowing businesses to respond to market influences. And Thomas Sowell actually puts this, so the backwards idea here is that it's not the thing that's going, that the price of anything, including labor, is determined by the product output, is determined by what it will fetch at market, rather than how much effort went into that. Now, usually people use the example of poop. I can put a ton of effort into creating a steaming pile, but the price of that steaming pile is not determined by how much effort I put into making that steaming pile, but by what it will fetch at market, which is determined by supply and demand. Or put simply, as Sowell mentions on page 151. But again, input is not the measure of value. Results are. So I think that's basically the summation of the chapter in a sentence. He does touch up on a concept that I've been trying to teach people that I completely forgot was actually in this book. He mentions it in a way that's kind of difficult to discern, but there's a difference between the notions of earn and the notion of deserve. He mentions on page 151, despite the popularity of the phrase income distribution, most income is earned, not deserved, not distributed. And then he concludes with mentioning the notion of deserved on page 152. I've been trying to get people to, in their minds, get rid of the word deserve. Why does a CEO deserve $50 million? Well, no, the question is, how has the CEO earned the $50 million? Why does a poor person deserve to be poor? Well, no, the natural state of things is poverty. What have they done to earn the things that they have that get them beyond the natural state? which of course is poverty. Wealth is not the natural state. Wealth must be built. Wealth must be earned. And this is kind of a fundamental disagreement. This is kind of a fundamental dislocation, if you will, in concept of how one side of, we'll say, the political aisle views economics and how the other side views it. So I've been telling people in my daily life here, if you want to make your life better, if you want to just have the world around you just be more pleasurable, more desirable, get rid of the word deserve in your mind. And if you need a substitute, replace it with earn. And this is something, this notion of earn versus deserve, and the notion that the natural state is poverty, is something that Sowell doesn't really go much into in Economic Facts and Fallacies. For that conversation, I would actually highly recommend his Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, which I'll be doing a review on shortly because I'm just about finished with that book. So make sure to stay tuned for that because that's coming soon. But this whole notion of poverty being the natural state versus wealth being the natural state should be fairly evident, and is something that Adam Smith made in The Wealth of Nations, spent an entire book of The Wealth of Nations. There's 5 books in The Wealth of Nations, basically explaining that wealth isn't the natural state of things. Wealth must be built. And the way you build wealth is through savings and delaying of gratification. And as a result, whatever you wind up getting from taking on that risk is something you don't deserve. It's something that you earn. So I think with that, we're going to conclude. We will continue in our series on Thomas Sowell's Economic Facts and Fallacies with Chapter 6, which is entitled Racial Facts and Fallacies. So looking forward to that one. And until then, this has been Mike, signing off.